All right, so it's 10 o'clock, time to get things started. Thank you everybody for attending. We are Whitespace Studios, and we are here to talk to you today about, sorry about that, I just had a massive feedback loop through my headphones, so I'm back again. We're Whitespace Studios, and we're here to talk to you today about strategies for integrations and SIAM. And on the phone from Whitespace Studios, we have these three gentlemen, James Neal, Tim Short, and myself, Robert Fedoric. And together we have an accumulated 20 years in the ServiceNow space, doing development both in the traditional ITSM stack and custom apps. We have 8 combined hackathon wins. We have 7 ServiceNow speaking engagements at the Knowledge Conference, and we have 12 years building really complex integrations in very demanding environments, such as financial services. And recently, we've spent close to 3,000 hours distilling all of our integration knowledge into a single app that's now available on the App Store. But today we're actually focused on bringing you as much of that experience that we've gleaned over those 12 years and those 3,000 hours of development, so that you can take those same lessons and build them into your own integration solutions. Okay, so a lot of Ask the Expert sessions might start with the mechanics, but we assume that a lot of the people that you have joined already are probably already familiar with the mechanics that make integrations on ServiceNow. So instead of focusing on the mechanics themselves, we're really going to focus on the strategy involved in integrations and SIAM, and why it's important to have one before you actually start building. Okay, and we also find that the business is going to respond a lot better to the strategy of integrations versus the mechanics of them. All right, now when we talk about integrations, there's several different flavors involved, right? And so whereas many of the integrations that we do just by deploying ServiceNow, such as where do my users come from, where do my locations come from, where do my companies come from, where we see there's a source of truth somewhere and I want to gather that data into my system and integrate that way. We are less focused on the data exchange in this session, and we're really more focused on the concept of eBonding within integrations. Okay, so data exchange, they tend to be less onerous, and is just fundamental on the mechanics. But in our experience, integrations that factor for eBonding are much more complex, and they justify the effort in talking about and developing a strategy before you do too many of them at your customers or at your own site. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the reality of the integration landscape today. Okay, so if we take as we go out in the field and we look at how integrations have happened on ServiceNow over the last 10 years, especially the ones involving eBonding or two-way integration, what we find is that almost every integration out there is custom, right? They share no common components. If you have 3 integrations built on a system, more than likely they have been built individually, completely different, and share nothing in between. So this leads to really heavy cost of ownership, as new admins have to relearn all the integrations, and the integrations themselves aren't even centrally stored unless it says a scoped app. So we've literally been in front of customers where we've asked, how many integrations do you have, and the answers are like some or a few. There's no precision control over how many you have. We also find that there's no centralized error handling, since each app is bespoke. If indeed there's any error handling at all. And so each integration is basically left on its own for admins to determine and notify whether there's failures in the integration or not. We also find that the integrations out there have no process context. So if I manage to find an integration on a system, it's void of context. So I'd have to read into the tables that you're modifying, and I'm just going to assume that, okay, this must be an incident integration versus a change or a change task integration. The integrations themselves roll up at a reporting level to no process whatsoever. Furthermore, there's no relationship context. This is really important for places like MSPs or customers that deal with multiple vendors. If I have a bunch of tickets, I'm usually reliant on a correlation display or a category architecture to find out, hey, did this ticket even go to my vendor, or which client is this ticket from? All right, so there's very little relationship context within the integrations that we're building. Okay, now more than ever, we're seeing simplicity fight against flexibility. So because we have all these problems before it, we now have senior IT leadership saying, look, don't build me a custom Jira integration, just get me a stock one from somewhere. But as we all know, those stock integrations have very little flexibility. You're basically going in and recoding it yourself once you find out that your system looks a little bit differently than the person who built that simple stock integration. All right, another large problem is that the integrations are completely invisible to the people that rely on them. So if I'm on the service desk and I am transitioning a ticket to one of my vendors who I'm eBonding with, I'm very lucky to find out if the ticket has been bonded at all, or if there's any problems with the bond, or if the vendor has fulfilled their part of the bargain. People have to work very, very long and hard to build these into their own integrations, if they do it at all. And so what we're finding is it's only the admin whoever gets the visibility into whether this thing is working as we expected or not. So the reality is just a red hot, whoops, sorry, missed a point. We're also finding that integrations are almost always built to a minimum standard. So if somebody says, hey, I need you to build a Jira integration for me, they are not telling you to make sure that all your integrations are centrally managed and that you have proper control over the bonds and the messaging and the connections. They're not telling you that. They're telling you, get me connected to Jira. And the fastest, easiest way to do that is to build to a minimum standard. So this whole, custom integrations, every integration being custom has led us to it's just a real mess. And this is why we've created our own manifesto for dealing with integrations at scale. Okay, so we find the following truths are self-evident within the integration space. Number one, there are more technologies an enterprise must use than it has resources to support on its own. Right? If you're a hotel chain, you will not be able to have, expert level support for every different technologies that you use. You're going to concentrate on the technologies that are part of your digital DNA, your reservation system, your booking system, your customer experience collection systems, and your financials and your property management. Everything else you're going to want to source out. So we know that today companies want to source the support of the technologies because there's too many technologies to support. Number two, we need a single source of engagement, right? And we're going to use ServiceNow for that, but we also need to send work to appropriate vendors. So no way in hell are we going to tell all of our employees, hey, look, if you have a problem with X, go to ServiceNow. If you have a problem with Y, call HP. If you have a problem with Z, call Dell. We're not going to make sure our customers understand every vendor relationship we have. We just want them to use our single source of engagement. Item number three, we assert that easy, out-of-box, and plug-and-play integrations are a myth and provide virtually no value to the processes requiring the eBonding. We find you plug them in, and then at the very best of times, you're heavily modifying them to make sure that the out-of-box or plug-and-play integration works the way you expect it to for your processes. We also assert that unless an integration is built within a framework for building integrations, custom integrations are always built to that minimum standard, which means there is nobody looking out for the big picture. We assert that integrations need quick and clean creation, modification, and deactivation. So the businesses that do invest in multi-vendor environments they can't do with sprawling projects for each vendor change. We all know, especially those of us who've been in the field, we all know how expensive and long those integration projects can be. And at the speed with which businesses want to engage with service providers, turning them on, turning them off, quickly getting them integrated, they just can't do that with the integration model we have today, which is every single integration bespoke. And lastly, we assert that ServiceNow's expansion means even more lines of business are going to be operating this way. So yesterday we were just talking about IT and all the vendors that IT has to use in order to deliver the services that they do. Well, tomorrow, and in fact, some would argue today, we're going to get that from HR, facilities, security, and any other process area that we've put on the ServiceNow platform. Okay, so with the manifesto, we are going to argue. So our manifesto is not new, and in fact, there's a lot of people that have already been talking about all this kind of stuff long before we put fingers to keyboards. And the topic is called SIAM, Service Integration and Management. So if this sounds new, we very much encourage you to look at to sources of SIAM knowledge. Axelos has some great material on it. But what we want you to know is that, you know, this idea is not new. It's gaining traction very, very quickly. And it is to integrations what ITIL was to just general IT support. Okay, so SIAM is a layer between suppliers and the IT functions of a business, and allows the integration services offered by multiple providers, you know, whether they're internal or external. And according to Axelos, the technology framework that you choose for deploying these integrations is critical for the process. Okay, so this is the first time you're going to see process people say, you got to have the tooling right. So let's get the tooling right. And to do the tooling right, we need to step back. We need to get out of our heads of, oh, let's just build an integration, and let's think about building a strategy for performing integrations. And we propose 3 strategic goals for approaching SIAM and integration strategy. So number 1, provide the SIAM capability that the business wants. But if the business isn't telling you we want SIAM, prepare for it with the expectation that the business will want it someday. Number 2, centralize the integration management by building a framework of configurable components. To build each integration bespoke should be anathema to us. We must build a framework on ServiceNow to handle the integrations. The 1 integration today, but the 5 more integrations in the future. And number 3, we must build to a maximum standard. We must build the underpinnings to the maximum standard, not just single integrations to a minimum standard. And when we do that, we're going to factor for upgrades, common error handling, process visibility, and sustainable maintenance. Okay, so this is how we got to developing a strategy for integrations, and we're going to cover 5 main areas that we found needed to be addressed as we built integration after integration after integration. And these 5 areas are represented on our app, but we also want you to walk away with full knowledge of how these things work, so you can take that learning into your own systems. And so we're going to kind of trade back and forth between myself and Tim. And so Tim is going to talk a little bit about process representation during the build. So I'm just going to stop sharing here in a second. Okay, I've stopped sharing. Tim, do you want to take over?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. How's that looking? See my screen okay? So
yep, go for
we're going to talk.
No, we're still seeing mine. Not seeing yours yet.
Nope, it's good. So we're going to talk about processes, and the idea of the process is just simply a way to group your integrations. You know, normally these integrations are built kind of just custom, and there's no kind of grouping to kind of bring them together. Especially when you're dealing with multi-vendor environments, so you've got very similar integrations just going to different endpoints. They need to be grouped, really. It makes it easier for you to kind of find them and manage them. So process, we've implemented this as a record. We have a incident process here. We've called it ServiceNow incident. We kind of the idea is this is kind of following an out-of-the-box ServiceNow incident process. As you can see here, we've got many integrations related to it. So lots of integrations doing a very similar thing, just to different suppliers or different endpoints, all belonging to the incident process. Some of the other things that we've kind of bring together at a higher level is we want like a single entry point for all of these integrations. We don't, we could provide multiple endpoints for each system, but if all these integrations are for your incident process, why not just have one endpoint that all the different systems connect to? And it just makes it simpler for you to manage. So we've kind of built this in such a way that you have one kind of SOAP service which comes in. All of the systems connecting to this process will come into the same endpoint, and then we can identify the integration based upon who's logging in, and it just makes it simpler to manage. So one endpoint, one record to group like integrations. Something else that we've done here as well is we've kind of created a staging table, and a staging table is effectively our take on your import, the import set table. Now, import set tables work fine. They tend to be a little bit difficult to find the raw data. It's not so easy. You have to step into a couple of places and dig that out, which you can provide modules and stuff for it to make that easier. But the other thing with import sets is they only work inbound. And what we find is when you're integrating systems, some systems don't have the capability of being able to be modified or be flexible. And so we've kind of taken that upon ourselves to create a mechanism of allowing us to do data transforms both inbound and outbound. So if we have a look at the stages here, we break the stages down into the different processes. So here, incident, problem, change, just because the fields vary on different ones. If I come into the incident stage, and let's have a look at one of these. Just going to have a look at the inbound create then. And so in here, all we do is we just flatten all of the data coming in and out of the integration. And the reason for that is this is just going to give you a snapshot of what you've received from the external system. So when you receive data, just take the data as it is and put it into your staging table. And then if there's any problems or what happened, is some of the mapping not right, was the data actually sent, you can very quickly see from here exactly what data was received. Very simple to go and find that and understand what happened. And then from there, you can then take that data and do all your kind of translations into your record. And likewise, outbound, if you want to do outbound transformations, take your data, transform it into the format that you want to send, and then stick it into your staging table. And then that data is the data which will then be sent to the external system. And if you need to refer back, what data did we send? What did it look like? You can come to your staging table and see exactly what was sent. So that's the kind of process, really, a way to group like integrations, control entry like single point, and looking at doing the kind of staging to allow you to do both inbound and outbound translations and transformations. Oh, back over to you, Rob. I think I covered processes.
Great. You stop sharing?
Sure.
Okay. And I'm going to go back to share. All right, so thanks, Tim. Just make sure that it's properly sharing on the YouTube. Hasn't quite synced up to YouTube yet. Lisa, can you make sure that it's broadcasting from my screen, please? Says I'm live. Okay, so we just want to review some of the process advantages that Tim outlined, but tracking the processes as their own distinct record allows us to group all the integrations. So, if you're a large enterprise and you have several different organizations helping you on your incident management, under that incident process, you will find the 5 separate integrations. Right, and the data that we track at that process level is setting the staging table, and that was really important because it supports bi-directional transformation. We have record of all our raw data, and then it kind of aligns with the best practice, which is don't integrate to a table directly, right? And then finally, it just defines a single point of entry for all integrations. So I talked about processes, but now this word integration keeps up. Rob, what do you mean when you say that the process groups the integrations? So why don't we pass it back to Tim? And Tim, if you could just kind of take them through and show them how we actually build integrations as its own record.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rob. I'll share my screen. So we looked at the process. Let's look at integration. And the integrations are effectively, they're kind of like the one-to-one relationship between an external system.
Hey, 1 second, Tim. Is James, are you... The screen looks paused to me. I'm not sure.
There's just a slight delay, and it should be rendering just a moment.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, all good to go now?
Yep.
Cool. So, yeah, integrations, certainly the way we've kind of defined an integration, it is like a one-to-one mapping between the process and an external system that you connect into. The reason we kind of pull this into a separate record is, what you tend to find in custom integrations is a lot of this stuff kind of goes into system properties. So retry limits, synchronous timeouts, attachment configuration, all that kind of stuff ends up being added as system properties, and that's fine in itself. But when you start to manage lots of integrations, that starts to become unwieldy. By creating an integration record, we effectively bring all of those properties as fields on that record, and it's just one place where all of that is contained together. It's just self-contained, easy to find, easy to manage. You're not having to hunt around for all these properties, and stops that proliferation of them. It also allows you to very easily control the connections to different systems independently of each other. One of the things we find, especially attachments is one of the things which varies so much from system to system. I can, this system can only send 3 per message. This system can only send 5, but it can only send 5 megabytes, but it can only actually take 25 megabytes overall. Everyone varies, different file types. All of those properties into here, and we can just control it. And then I'm on my incident process. I'm integrating my incident process to several different systems, and each of those systems have different timeouts, different attachment properties. It doesn't matter. It's all kind of following that same framework, and just allows you to configure those to work slightly differently. Some other things that we kind of wanted to put on here, things like controlling attachment of logs and attachment of payloads. It just kind of, one of the things that we've come up with when we've done this is we've created a logger which actually adds the logs as an attachment to some of the records themselves, to just make it easy to find. And we kind of HTML pretty print those as well. As I'm sure you guys know, working with GSlog is not always the easiest method of debugging, and we've got some new tools coming out now to help with that. But especially within kind of asynchronous type situations and situations which are kind of live and you might not be able to reproduce easily, having a good structured login really does help in that respect. I think some of the other things that we've kind of put onto here as well is the integration is kind of, it's the container for connections and messages, and that's something we'll kind of come to a little bit later on. But it just allows you to define everything in one place. It's much more structured and kind of groups everything together, and easily to be able to configure the different properties. I think that more or less covers integrations of why we've kind of done it this way.
All right, you want to pop it over to me?
Yeah, sure.
All right. All right, so just to review on integrations. So when we determined to make integrations a record in and of themselves, we used it to define a relationship between a vendor or a customer and that process, or a one-to-one relationship. And it helps keep all those integrations separate, but also identifiable. So next time I walk into a customer site, how many integrations do you have? I have 3. I have 2 on incident, 1 on change. It's as easy to identify our integrations just like that. And also, just because every integration is different, we take the ways in which integrations are different, at least from the base mechanics, and we present them as properties on the integration record. So logging, retries, cleanups, timeouts, and attachment handling. We can now define that integration by integration because we've resolved to make it a record. And then that record itself is a parent to other records, such as collections and connections and messages. So now that we've mentioned connections, I'm going to pass it right back to Tim, who's going to talk to us about connections. We'll stop sharing. All right, Tim. Tim, it's all you. Tim, did we lose your audio?
I'm chatting away on mute. Apologies. So connections are a record in a similar vein to integrations. It's taking things which are usually handled by system properties, so endpoint URL, user authentication, and bringing it into a separate record associated to the integration. We have multiple environments, so you can set up multiple connections, production, pre-protest, in this case here, and because you can add to those. And then because you've got a separate record for each system that you want to connect to, you can adjust the endpoints for each of those systems, the authentication details for each of those systems, and you can just switch between them by turning them on and off. There's no need to go and update any system properties. It's all self-contained in a record, associated to the integration, very easy to hand. It just makes it easier to manage. Certainly that's what we found anyway. A couple of other kind of important points on how we've decided to use the connection, and I think it's worth bearing in mind when you do your own integrations. I think certainly with the SOAP ones for sure, you usually have to give a user the SOAP roles, which grants them access to all of the different table APIs. So if you have a kind of SOAP read role, you can read all of them. And you have to kind of control that with individual ACLs. So you'll have to be going into the tables, making sure that actually they don't have access to all of that traditionally. By having a user specified here, this inbound user, what we're doing here is we're saying that only this user can use this integration. So there's no need to kind of give these global roles. You still need the script type roles because we're going to be running scripted web services on the way in. But it doesn't open up all of your table APIs to external systems, and only this user can use this integration. So it's a nice extra level of validation that you can do there, and just kind of restrict who can do what. It's also great because we use this to identify who what the integration is when somebody connects. So if an external system authenticates into us, we use this user and we say, okay, this user has connected, so therefore it must be this integration. And from the integration, we know which company it is and what process they're looking at. And any updates that integration then make within ServiceNow, we can stamp them as this integration user. So in the work notes, if the work notes are updated, updated by integration test. Updated by Jira if it's a Jira integration. So and obviously if you can name those in such a way to include the potentially the company as well of who's integrating, update from Whitespace Studio. So the users who are the analysts working on the tickets have got a meaningful kind of reference of where that updates come from. It's not system or some kind of REST.integration or something like that. It's actually a kind of meaningful username of what's happening there. I think that more or less covers connections really. That's that was the main gist of them, I think.
All right, if you want to let me know when you stop sharing. Okay.
Yeah, it's all good.
Got it. Okay, so just to review some of the value points by by looking at connections as their own records. So it's a better way of managing multiple environments. So like the one thing that drove me absolutely bananas when I was doing integrations was, I would build it in dev, but then I would somehow have to refactor it so that when it got to test, it was aimed at a completely different set of environments. If you build connections carefully, it factors for that automatically. It's a centralized environment for users, endpoints, and authentication, controlling who uses that integration, which is critically important, not only for security, but also for visibility, because now the people on our service desks or whatever team is looking at the tickets themselves can see, oh, this user, the Jira integration user, the SAP integration user, has updated the ticket, right? So a lot more visibility into the actual integration itself than just kind of crossing our fingers and hoping that it has all worked. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is messages, and I'm going to send it back to Tim for a second.
Thanks, Rob.
All you.
So come out of connections and into messages. So the concept of the message was to have one central place to kind of contain all elements of what makes the actual data kind of flow to and from, and how you transform that. On this incident integration, you can see we've got a lot of messages here. We have 27 of them, and the idea of this is to reduce the complexity. If you're building an integration, you could build it with one message. Could be one scripted web service. It might be 1,000 lines long and covers update, resolve, reopen, close, create. And that's fine. You can do that. But if you want to come and manage, if there's if there's a little problem with suspend incident, you need to go into that and modify that massive kind of complex message that you're increasing the likelihood of affecting some of the other logic and then potentially breaking something else while you're trying to fix something. It's just harder to manage. So by breaking that down into smaller, separate chunks, it's easier to manage, the logic is simpler, and you can modify things in isolation. If there's something wrong with a reopen incident functionality, I can just modify that one specific message. I don't have to modify one giant one and try and fix everything. So it's also, like I said earlier, there's a central place for the different elements, what make up what we determine as a message. So if you think about it, when you're creating an integration, like a ticket exchange integration, you're going to need some kind of trigger. So in this case, incident, you're going to need some kind of trigger on an incident, usually custom business rules to fire this particular message in this particular situation. That's then going to trigger a bit of script, what traditionally building up some kind of scripted web service to generate your payload to go out, and then all your kind of translation and transformation type logic needs to be going in there. And so this brings it all together. So we kind of put various of the bits of elements in here, but the main thing, the main kind of components to it are, we have a template to allow us to build a message. Similar, in the kind of scripted web services, I guess we're doing some substitutions in here to build that up, and then we kind of configuration of what direction is this message going to go, and kind of responses and receipts and things like that. It's all in one place. If we need to, dealing with REST type integrations, obviously you can have like additional paths and stuff. So we kind of bring all that into here, all in the same place. Trigger, this effectively replaces the business rule. So rather than having to go in and building custom business rules for each integration that you build, or for each new process that you're wanting to try and integrate, just have one business rule on that table to then go and look at your, in our case, messages, but to go and look at a set of triggers that you can then define and use that to send the information, as opposed to editing the business rules. So that's what we do here with the trigger. It works in a very similar way to business rules, but it just saves you from having to go and add those on there. And we also do kind of all of our sort of translation in here as well. So we sort of run scripts here to do, take data from one place to another, when it, extract it from the payload into the stage, and then transform it from the stage into the target records, and vice versa. So that bi-directional transformation stuff all happens in here too. So I think, yeah, centralizing that stuff in one place just makes it easier to manage. You go to one place, you know what the trigger is, you know what the message, the integration is going to look like, the payload is going to look like, you know the other bits and pieces of its configuration and all the transformation scripts and stuff in the same place too. We definitely found that helps us. I more or less covers messages, I think, Rob.
All right, cool. Just stop sharing. All right, so just to review some of the benefits you can get by looking at the things you would have put in your gigantic script include functions and breaking them out into individual records on their own is you now have self-contained places where everything is stored about that function, right? It's message payload, it's translation, it's transformation. And what you may have noticed if you looked at a list of all of Tim's messages was that those messages map very, very closely to functions on a process map. So if you had your incident process all mapped out, there's going to be times when you change its status to waiting, or you pass it to a vendor, or you wait for the vendor to pass it back to you. And a lot of those processes are mimicked in the messages. Okay, and in that way, you can treat the ways you interact with the record in an integration as kind of a microservice. So you're only dealing with, this message is all about resolving the ticket. This message is all about commenting on the ticket from another system, right? They become microservices. Okay, and where we found the magic really happened, and where kind of the least amount of effort had been placed in doing custom integrations, is with bonding. Okay, so Tim's going to take over again and talk to you about how you should consider the treatment of bonds within ServiceNow.
Thanks, Rob.
It's all yours.
Thank you. So the bonds really kind of are the heart of eBonding, as the name suggests. And the idea of the bond is, you want to take, so traditionally a bond would be the correlation ID on the incident record that you're integrated. Just be a string field. Yeah, I've got that external ticket number, brilliant, I'm bonded. But actually, ticket exchange integrations, if they're done well, they're much more complicated than that. We're not talking just data exchange here. We're not just talking taking data and just dumping it elsewhere. I mean, they have their place, but if you're wanting to look at, integrate processes, then you need a bit more control than that. And that's where the bond comes in. So we take that string field and we've expanded it out into a separate record. And then that allows us to have kind of state and status. We can control what state the bond is in. So if you're sending a create message out to an external system, then the bond is new. If somebody tried to send you an update message, but the ticket didn't exist, then that makes no sense. You can only send an update when the bond is open, not when the bond is new. And it just adds like an extra level of validation, that process around who can send what, control of ownership. Who owns this particular ticket at any one time, and that's important as well in helping maintain data integrity. You don't want, if you're in a kind of multi-vendor environment, a SIAM environment, 4 or 5 people all integrated on the same ticket, you don't want everybody updating the priority or trying to change the CI or category. You want one defined owner. Supplier A, you're looking after this for now. Other people can collaborate via comments and stuff, but the ownership dictates who can edit what at any one time, and then the ownership can be passed around and just controls it that way. Obviously the references are important. You do need those external ticket references, so that's all on here too. We track things like what attachments have been sent and received. We find that useful, so we can see that type of stuff. We also have on here the history, and history allows us to track everything what's happened with this particular bond, this integration to this ticket. So what messages have been sent, what messages have been received, and that is kind of really important because that sits there, and this can be visible to your analyst. You can put a link to this on your incident, and then the analyst can come and look at the bond. What state is the bond in? Is it healthy? Is it errored? What's the history? And the history is actually just a kind of a record of the transaction. So the bond is a container for the transactions, and the transactions are kind of like the request receipt pairs in an asynchronous integration. These are the messages flowing backwards and forwards between the two systems. And we've got a list of transactions here, but this is transactional data, again, by the name. It's important while you're sending the data, and it's kind of important while the bond is open. You might want to be looking at this and seeing what's happening and queuing messages and all that such stuff. But once the bond is closed and this ticket is finished, this data then just kind of is starting to clog the system up. It's not really needed anymore. And what we can do is we can clean up this data, but because we've got the history, we can kind of remove this with still knowing that we can refer back to this in the future and have an idea of what happened without kind of leaving all of this data clogging up the system. So the bond is really that control. It's the process control around data being sent and received between systems, and that ownership control. It's a really powerful concept in managing ticket exchange integrations. Back over to you, Rob.
Okay. All right, so just to review what Tim was saying on bonds, they're a robust way to differentiate processes from data exchange. So in data exchange, we're just saying there's a source of truth, I want those records, you know, the correlation IDs, right? But with bond records, you're establishing that the linkage between a record on our side and a record on their side should be represented as a whole record unto itself. And that record will be a collection of transactions from the instance of that integration, right? So we have an instant integration with Dell. The bond between two tickets is an instance of that integration. And having that bond record represents stuff that will allow us to more easily clean up those messages, and it will provide visibility to the people that are working with bonded records. It'll also help us answer the following questions, right? Are you the owner of this part of the process? If not, it's not going to let you do stuff to the bonded records. Are you allowed to send and receive data at this point? It's going to allow you to track and manage the history of that integration instance. So did the integration work as we expected? It's going to allow us to answer all sorts of questions about the health of the integration. What surprises us the most is that even on two-way integrations, in the wild, we have never seen people even ask for this kind of record type. So making sure that you can, or theorizing ways you can collect bond information or represent bonds as records can really amp up, and we argue is absolutely necessary for doing a proper eBond integration between a vendor and a supplier, or a vendor and a customer. And what, you know, if you do this carefully, right, you can relate all this information all the way up from bonds to connections to messages, all the way up to processes and companies, so that at the end of the day, or we're talking about one single framework for doing all of this, you can have one page that tells you how is the health of all my integrations, of all the bonds that I currently have open with my service vendors, which ones are not healthy, or which ones are acting in ways that I don't that I don't expect. So you're getting a total architectural engineering outlook of all this data, but you could also, from a process perspective, kind of gain insights into who's using the integrations, how often are they used, are they valuable, etc. And it's all because we chose up front, we're not going to treat integrations bespoke anymore. We're going to wrap them inside of a single framework that everybody plays inside. All right, so if you actually want to see what we did when we put all of these processes and all of these concepts into play, we do have an app on the store. It's called eBonding, and one of our customers call it the gold standard in eBonding trust and reliability. Okay, and it's all on the Now platform, and it's certified. So if you don't want to take on this kind of mission on your own, we can help you with that. At this point, we'd love to just you know, thank you for taking time out of your day to hear our story and to let us share this knowledge with you. If you want to see us on the web, it's thewhitespace.io. You can follow us on Twitter at whitesp_. And at this point, we'd love to take any questions that you have.